Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. Welcome back to Fallout, where today we're actually going to be taking a look at Fallout 1. And this is going to be a little bit of an overview and a guide for the very first Fallout game for anybody that's actually getting into the first games. So recently I streamed through this, and it was really fun going back and playing these old games. In this, we're going to be talking about what the special stats do, what kind of things I'd recommend, and what are the pros and cons for taking each of these. So right away you can see there's a couple of people that you can pick. You even got Albert here, which is, I think, canonically the actual vault dweller, whether it be him or the other two options that you get here. But we're going to go over to create a character because I think that is kind of the best. So first up here, name, you can pick whatever name you'd like. Name does not matter, it's just whatever you're going to be referred to as, but you do need to pick a name. Age also plays absolutely no role in this game. There is no bonus for being as young as possible. There's no bonus for being as old as possible. There's no bonus for being any age. Male and female does play a bit of a role in Fallout 1, and it will affect some of the perks that you can take, as well as some of the interactions that you can have with other people. But it's not as fleshed out as it would become in the later games. So whether you're male or female, honestly, it doesn't matter too much. Just pick whatever you would like to be. And that moves us over to the more important parts, which are the special stats, our character points. Just like all the Fallout games, we start out with 5 in everything, and we got 5 extra stats. So let's go over each of these stats. Strength determines your overall HP in this game, melee damage, and it will also determine which weapons you can wield effectively. In the older games, you do need to have enough strength to wield the weapons. You can still wield them without the amount of strength, but it's going to decrease your accuracy. And since there is no, ADSing like there is in the later games where you can actually point and shoot where you want to go, accuracy percentage is actually pretty important. So I'd recommend that you pick enough strength to go with whatever weapons you would like to use. Generally around 6 is usually okay. That covers most of the weapons in the game. That'll allow you to wield at least 80% of all the weapons effectively in the game. Even more so once you get power armor, because power armor does give you increased strength in these older games. I think it gives you +2 strength normally, but you can get advanced power armor that gets you +3 strength. So 6 is usually the max that you really need to go to, because once you have the advanced power armor, you're going all the way up to 9. You can basically wield everything. I don't think that there's anything in these older games that actually takes 10 strength to wield. But if you're going with a melee or an unarmed character, it might make sense to go with more strength just so that you can hit a little bit harder. Or if you want to go tankier to get more HP, then strength actually makes a difference. Perception is actually pretty important in these older games. In the later games, perception became pretty garbage and was only useful for basically just the perks, and that was about it. It didn't really do much. In these old games, it actually determined how far away you could accurately hit things. So you did usually want to have a lot of this if you're going to go with small guns, big guns, energy weapons. If you're going melee or unarmed, perception is not as necessary, and then in that case you're pretty much just using it for the perks that it has available. If you are going with guns though, I would recommend pretty high. Endurance actually isn't that important in these older games because most of the endurance perks usually require a low amount of endurance. Endurance pretty much just covers your HP, your resistances towards stuff, and that can be kind of mitigated thanks to armor and if you have high enough healing. So endurance actually isn't too important in these older games, so you could actually drop it down a few points if you'd like. I usually shoot for around 4. Then we've got charisma. Charisma is actually kind of good in these older games because this does actually help your companions out quite a bit, as well as it just lets you get through certain speech checks. So having more charisma can be useful. If you don't care about either of those things though, you just want to be a murder hobo, you can drop charisma to 1. That's what I do a lot of times in these games. So the more intelligence you get, the more points you can put into stuff, which is pretty important because in these older games you can actually go above the 100%. 100% is where you're at good efficiency with any of the weapons or with any of the other skills, but you can go above that up to 200% or 300% in some of these games. So having higher intelligence to get those maxed out quicker does help, especially if you tag those skills. Then we've got agility. Agility is actually really important in these old games because this determines your overall action points. So the more agility you have, the more action points you get, and you need action points to do everything in these games. So this is open your bag, reload your weapon, shoot your weapon, move your character, any of that. Agility helps it out. So maxing out agility is not necessarily a bad idea, really, on any build. You don't necessarily need to do that, as if you're going to be using a weapon that still gets to hit 2 or 3 times with your maxed out build, that should be fine with the amount of action points, so you can calculate that how you'd like, but I would usually put this higher than lower. Luck is pretty much crit chance like it always is in these games, and every weapon can hit crits in this. Nothing really has a crit modifier, so this is good. In these older games, it also determines whether or not you can find random encounters because they are truly random. So if you want to max out your luck early on and go for an alien blaster run, you can do that, and it's actually pretty effective. So if you want to take that, you absolutely can. Now, before I build my character up here with the special stats, I would like to go over the traits too and the skills. So in traits, There are quite a few of them. The very first one that we got is fast metabolism. This one lets you heal faster than you otherwise would, but you're more vulnerable to radiation and poison. This can be kind of useful because you can wait healing, as well as a lot of the time you're going to be moving around the map, and that's a good time to just be regenerating HP too. So fast metabolism is not a bad trait if you would like to take it. Bloody Mess is our next trait, which this one actually doesn't do anything. Well, it actually does affect the ending to Fallout 1, and it does make it so whenever you kill things, they're more likely to splatter, which is kind of cool, but it doesn't actually give you any major pro or con to it. So if you'd like to take it, then you absolutely can. There's no downside to this. Then we got Bruiser. Bruiser gives you 2 more strength points, which is really good, but it also takes away 2 of your action points. And this one is going to be best on like an unarmed build, because there is a couple of things that you can do with an unarmed build where Bruiser is actually really good. It's also pretty good on a melee build. If you're not going with melee or unarmed, I would recommend that you kind of ignore Bruiser though, because it generally isn't worth it for wielding like heavy weapons, at least in Fallout 1. Jinx is pretty much a goofy trait. It makes it so there can be critical failures on your part, but more critical failures on the enemy part. So you might fall down and hurt yourself, you might hit somebody and hurt yourself, the enemy might hit you and hurt themselves. There's quite a few things that can go on here. It's pretty silly, but I would recommend it on like more playthroughs, more so than your first playthrough. Not really the best for your first one. Then we got Small Frame. Small Frame gives you +1 agility, but it lowers your carry weight. This can be kind of useful if you know that you're not going to be carrying around very much stuff, just the necessities. Then it's pretty nice because +1 agility is really good. That's potentially 1 more action point. And this also, agility also affects your armor class, which is how likely you are to dodge from hits. So that's pretty good too. You might actually avoid a couple of things thanks to this. So Small Frame is one to consider. Good Natured makes it so this nerfs all of your combat stats, but it buffs things like First Aid, Doctor, Speech, Barter. All of those. Good Natured can be fine. It's not bad. It's going to hurt you in the short term, but in the long term it can help you out just because you can get those stats up. Depends, if you're just going to go with one attack style throughout the entire game, then this one still can be good, especially if you're going to be using those other skills. But in Fallout 1, Barter is kind of useful for the amount of money it can save you. Speech is kind of useful for just getting through certain areas like it usually is. First Aid and Doctor can be good for saving up on supplies as well, so there is that. It might be one to consider. Then we've got One-Hander. This gives you more accuracy with one-handed weapons, less accuracy with two-handed weapons. Generally, you're going to be using two-handed weapons most of the time. This one can be good if you're going with a very specific build, and it can be actually pretty strong in the early game and the mid game, because you get the 10mm pistol right away, it's fairly good. You also got the 10mm submachine gun, which is quite good, and later on you can get like the 223 pistol, which is fantastic. And if you were going to go with a high luck build and go for the alien blaster, that's also a one-handed weapon. You just use that the entire way through the game if you would like. And then we got Chem Reliance. You can take chems, but you're more likely to get addicted to them. I probably wouldn't recommend this because there's not a whole lot of chems in these old games, and generally you don't need to take them, but if you want to, you can run this. Finesse nerfs your damage, but it gives you more crit chance. This one honestly doesn't really help all that much, I found. Even when I have ran it on different characters, it just feels kind of okay in these older games. Generally, I like having more consistent damage across the board, and then it's nice to hit a random crit every once in a while, as opposed to not doing very much damage and then hoping for those random crits to pop up more often so I can hit a little bit harder. So I don't know if I'd really recommend Finesse. It's not terrible, but it's not great. Chem Resistant makes it so that chems don't last as long, but you're less likely to get addicted to them. There's not a whole lot of chems in the game. You don't really need to have this, but if you want to take it, go for it. Kamikaze makes it so you have better sequence, but you take more damage. Not really that good. Sequence is basically just can you go first or not, and if you have high agility, you're likely going to go first anyway, so this can be circumvented thanks to that. It's not really that useful in this game. It got a whole lot better in Tactics when it actually gave you damage. Then we got Night Person. Improves your intelligence perception during the night, nerfs it during the day. If you want to do a character build that's only playing at night, this does kind of make sense, but it doesn't really help all that much, and sometimes it can actually be kind of hard to see in these older games, so I usually tend to like go to most of the villages and towns and stuff when it's daytime rather when it's nighttime. Then we got Heavy-Handed. This makes it so melee damage hits harder, but you're less likely to hit crits. This one can be good on a melee or unarmed build. It's pretty nice. You can do pretty good damage with it. Certain weapons like the Ripper and the Power Fist benefit from this quite a bit, so that's pretty awesome. Skilled is up next. This one gives you 5 more skill points every time that you level up, which is pretty useful, but it makes it so your perk rate goes up by 1. So in Fallout 1, you get a perk every 3 levels. With this, you get a perk every 4 levels. That sounds kind of like a bad thing and a nerf overall, but keep in mind, by the time that you're beating Fallout 1, you're probably not going to be higher than level like 15. Like, that's usually about the max, and the actual max of the game is 21. So being denied like a couple of perks doesn't really hurt, especially considering there's not a whole lot of perks in Fallout 1. So skilled is actually not too bad if you would like to take it. It also makes it so all of your skills go up pretty substantially too, so that's pretty nice. Then we've got Fast Shot. Fast Shot makes it so you can't use aim shots anymore, which make it so that you can target things like the eyes, the head, the groin, the legs, the arms, whatever part of the enemy that you would like to. You can target that normally, but if you have Fast Shot, you can't do target shots anymore, but it does cost 1 less action point to attack with every weapon. This one is actually kind of bugged, and it works for unarmed and melee in the first game as well, which makes it so unarmed is really, really strong if you want to go with that build, because I think you can get a Power Fist down to costing 1 action point attack. So if you have 10 action points to attack with, or more in certain cases, then you can potentially hit something up to 10 times and it can't really fight back against you, which is really, really strong. So Fast Shot is really strong on those builds. It's pretty strong on guns builds too. If you don't really care about aim shots, and this one's pretty good, especially if you're using burst fire weapons like the shotgun, or the combat shotgun, the 10mm submachine gun. Weapons like that can just burst fire and do a lot. And then our very last trait is called Gifted. Gifted gives you minus 10% to all these skills, as well as minus 5 to your skill points every time that you level up, but it gives you plus 1 to all of your special stats. And that is a really big bonus. Gifted is generally the best trait in this game. It is really good, because this just gets you so much value. You can potentially take these points away. You are locked at up to level 2, so if you wanted to go down to the lowest amount of points that you could have, it would be 2 instead of 1. But from doing this, you get a substantial amount more of character points. For a basic build, if you're just getting into Fallout 1, I'd recommend taking something like Gifted, and then your other trait can kind of be whatever you'd like. Skilled is decent enough to kind of offset it if you would like, because then you'll get your stats back, although your perks are going to be taking longer. So that's not too bad. Fast Shot is a really good one, and it would make the game a lot more simple, because then you just have to shoot shots or reload. You don't have to do aim shots. If you like doing aim shots, you could absolutely do that though. So something like Fast Shot and Gifted would be something that I would recommend. I think this is pretty good. You could also go with something like Gifted and Small Frame. You have less carry weight, but you get another plus 1 to your special stats, which is pretty good. That's a possibility too. So if you want aim shots, maybe go with this. You could also go with like Fast Metabolism, that would be fine, or Bloody Mess if you just want something that's kind of neutral. You could also just potentially only take Gifted if you would like to. Those are all pretty decent options. For my general build that I'd recommend for Fallout 1, I would probably recommend 6 strength, so you can keep it at 5 thanks to Gifted, because this allows you to use basically every weapon that you're going to need. It gives you a decent amount of HP. It's good for unarmed and melee if you'd like to use that early on. You might want to level it up a bit more if you're going for that build. Perception, I would actually recommend that you put pretty high. I'd usually go for like 8, 9, or 10. This gets you the best accuracy at range, meaning that you can shoot enemies further away and more accurately. So once we start getting some levels, it's going to be easier to do that. And I'm assuming most people are probably going to be using guns. This is less useful if you're going with melee or unarmed. For endurance, you can actually drop this down a little bit. Usually I go for about 4 endurance. It isn't super necessary to have high endurance, and this is enough to get like Life Giver, and that can kind of make up for the amount of HP that we would be missing anyway. So if we want to go with that perk, we absolutely can thanks to this. Charisma, it's your call. If you wanted companions, put it up higher. Usually I don't really have companions, so I put it down low, and it doesn't really affect it too much. So I would just keep it there. Then the rest of the points, I usually just kind of divvy up between the other skills here. I'll usually go with something like 9 or 10 agility, just so that I can have more armor class and action points. I find that to be pretty useful. And then I'll raise up like intelligence and luck about the same. So I might go for 8 and 8. I might kind of drop intelligence down to like 7 and go for 9 luck. It depends if I want to be going out of my way to get other things like the alien blaster. More luck can be pretty useful here. And again, if you went with something like Fast Shot instead of a Small Frame, you could have more carry weight, and you could drop this down to like 8 and this go to 10. That would be perfectly fine too. You could also just drop luck down to like 5, keep it the same, and then put the other points into intelligence. And that way, when you do level up, you should be getting a ton of skill points every time that you level up. So then for skills, let's talk about each of these and what they do. Small guns. This one I would highly recommend that you tag. Small guns is the most common type of guns that you're going to be finding in the game. This covers machine guns, pistols, shotguns, sniper rifles. Pretty much everything in the first 2/3 of the game is going to be a small gun. And small guns are very, very useful. They don't really fall off until the end game of Fallout 1, so they're actually pretty good. Big guns, I wouldn't really recommend that you tag big guns. Big guns, there's only 3 of them in the game. There is the minigun, the rocket launcher, and the flamethrower, and that is it. And you're pretty much not getting them until the final third of the game. Pretty much once super mutants start showing up, then you can get them. You can buy them a little bit before that from certain vendors, but they're going to be very expensive. Their ammo is quite rare, and it's just not really worth it in my opinion. It is cool to have something like the rocket launcher deal really high damage or the minigun deal really high damage, but in terms of practicality, it's not really that great. Energy weapons is another one that I would recommend that you tag if this is your first time through, because energy weapons are pretty much the best weapons in the game. They are really, really strong. It's just that you're not getting them until likely the final third of the game. The laser rifle, the plasma rifle, the turbo plasma rifle are really, really good, and the alien blaster is one of the best weapons. If you can get that one early on, then you're pretty much set. Energy weapons are really good, but you probably don't want to be throwing points into them right away, because for like the first 2/3 of the game, you're just not going to get them. Unarmed is really good too. Unarmed, you can practically max out right away, because this is based off of your strength and agility stat, and it just has higher stats than usual. So right away, if you want to take this, you'll get brass knuckles. Unarmed and melee is really powerful. Unarmed in particular though, because again, if you take like fast shot with this, and you take something like heavy-handed or bruiser, or you just stay with gifted, it does a lot of damage, and it's really easy to get really overpowered with it. So if you want to go with unarmed, you absolutely can. It's going to do really well for you throughout pretty much the whole game. You still might want to take like small guns or energy weapons with this, just so then you got a ranged option to shoot at people. But if you want to get up close and personal, you can do a lot of damage with this. Melee, kind of the same thing. Melee is fairly solid early on. It does kind of fall off compared to unarmed later until you get like the Ripper. Like the Ripper and the Super Sledge are still in this game, and they're very powerful. So if you want to run those, you absolutely can. Throwing is kind of iffy. Throwing is basically explosives as well as like throwing knives. You can throw a spear. There's a couple of options here. I've never found it to be all that great of a skill to be taking most of the time, because it can be useful. You can do a lot of damage with those grenades, but it does kind of rely on a limited source, and I would recommend you get this to 100 as quick as you can before you really start throwing grenades, because if you don't have 100 in this and you start throwing grenades, there's a chance you just screw it up, throw it pretty much at your feet, and blow yourself up. So throwing a skill, not really that I go for. First aid can be good. This is using first aid kits to heal yourself up. This can save up on stim packs overall, and it gets you XP every time that you do it. So this one can be really, really good. If you want to take it, go for it. It's not necessary, but it is pretty decent. Then we've got Doctor. Doctor is basically you can heal any of your crippled parts, and this does take time in order for you to do this. But if you end up getting like your eye damaged, if you end up getting any of these crippled statuses over here, Doctor is the way to fix that up. So Doctor can be useful. It's not as needed in this game as it is in some of the other games like Tactics. Doctor became a whole lot more useful, but it can still be useful in this one. It also gets you XP. Sneak pretty much is sneak like it is in the other games. You have to activate it in these games, but sneak lets you sneak around places. You can potentially break into places easier this way. You could potentially pickpocket from people, or you could just hit people without them noticing you, and that's pretty useful. So sneak can be good. It's another decent one. Lockpicking is pretty good in this game because there's a decent amount of locks that you can pick, and you can get some decent gear from it. So not a bad option, and the higher the lock picking that you have, the more chance you have of opening up these, and less chance you have of just locking them forever. Because that can happen in these games. If you screw up your lock picking, you might actually be locked out of the actual thing for quite a while. Stealing's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to steal stuff, max it out. Traps is also kind of self-explanatory. With high traps, you can put down explosives, and you can potentially disarm explosives a little bit easier. This can be useful. There's not a whole lot of places that actually have traps in Fallout 1, so it has limited use there. Mines are of limited use as well in Fallout 1. It's not as great as it could be. I wouldn't really recommend it. Science is basically just for hacking computers. This can be useful in the early game because you can get a lot of XP from this. If you go back to Vault 13, where you start out, then you can just use your science skill on the computers there and get extra XP. Outside of that, it has a couple other niche uses, but it's really only used for like getting more XP early on, and it's not even really worth it. Repair is useful for fixing up certain things throughout the game. There's a few things that could be repaired, a few things that you might want to repair, and you get more XP whenever you do it, but it's really not that great. None of your weapons or armor never needs to be repaired, so you're good to go there. Speech. This one's kind of useful for just talking to people. You can potentially convince people to do things just like you can in all the other Fallout games. High speech is actually kind of useful, so if you want to take it, go for it. Barter can also be kind of good. You get better prices, pretty straightforward, so if you want to take it, go for it. Gambling is very similar to barter. It's basically the same type of thing, just you have a chance of winning more or losing more thanks to gambling. So if you want to max it out, go for it. And then we got Outdoorsman, basically just how often will you find random encounters in the wasteland. It's really not necessary. You don't need to put any points into Outdoorsman at all. It has a lot of limited use, so it's your call on this one. For the skills that I'd recommend that you take, probably something like small guns, energy weapons, and then maybe something like unarmed. You could also go with like lockpicking, which is pretty useful, especially at the start, or you could go with something like speech, which is also useful. Probably one of like those skills. Unarmed, if you really want to save your bullets and you might want to sell some stuff later on, then like tagging unarmed is really good. First thing that I recommend that you do though is max out something like small guns or unarmed if you're going with this sort of build. That way you can at least hit things, and when I say max out, just get it to 100 or higher, and then after that decide whether you want more points into this or other skills. I'd primarily focus on like small guns and energy weapons your first time around. That will make it pretty easy for you to be fighting most enemies. And hopefully this kind of helped you out for Fallout 1. This is just a mock-up of this character. Feel free to experiment though. This will just make probably the first run a whole lot easier in Fallout 1. Hopefully it helped you out a little bit, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye, everybody.